The Dallas sun was merciless that afternoon, pressing down on the city like a living thing determined to burn away everything soft. Heat shimmered off the glass towers, turning their mirrored faces into rivers of light. Even inside his midnight blue Porsche, Roger Brandner could feel it, the way the world outside seemed to vibrate with exhaustion and fury. The air conditioning hummed at full blast, cold enough to make his knuckles ache as he gripped the steering wheel. The leather seat beneath him was smooth, scenting the air with faint traces of polish and money. Everything in Roger's life was clean, sharp, and under control. Everything except him. He loosened his Italian silk tie and exhaled. The board meeting had dragged for hours, a slow execution disguised as discussion. Shareholders wanted higher returns. The press wanted a new story. Competitors wanted his head. Brander Industries, his company, was growing fast, but not fast enough to satisfy the hungry mouths that fed on its success. 3 years ago, that kind of pressure would have thrilled him. Now it just hollowed him out. He rubbed his thumb against his wedding ring, a habit that persisted long after the ring itself was gone. Amanda had been the last warmth in his life. 3 years since the drunk driver. 3 years since he'd watched her smile fade under hospital lights. Since then, he'd buried himself in spreadsheets, forecasts, and quarterly reports. Numbers that didn't ask questions or cry at night. The traffic light ahead blinked red. Roger's car rolled to a stop. He tapped the steering wheel, scanning the street absently. People moved like clockwork. Businessmen in suits, women with coffee cups, tourists melting into the sidewalk. Ordinary life, meaningless and distant. Then something broke through the monotony. A small figure stood near the park beside a makeshift table fashioned from a cardboard box draped with a white sheet. At first glance, Roger thought it was some art installation. Then he saw the sign. Letters scrawled in thick purple crayon, "Buy my lemonade. It's to help my sick mommy." The words were childish, uneven, and devastatingly sincere. The girl behind the sign couldn't have been more than 7 or 8. She wore a faded blue dress the color of a sky long forgotten, and her blonde ponytail drooped under the heat. Her tiny hands clutched a pitcher half filled with pale yellow lemonade. Every few seconds she'd call out, her voice thin but determined, "Buy my lemonade. Please, it's to help my sick mommy." Roger's chest tightened. He almost ignored her, almost pressed the gas when the light turned green. But that voice, it wasn't just a child's plea. It was Amanda's ghost whispering in his ear. She'd always stopped for lemonade stands no matter where they were. "These little moments matter, Roger," she'd say, squeezing his hand, laughing as she overpaid. "They remind us we're still human." Without another thought, Roger steered the Porsche toward the curb. He stepped out into the punishing heat, his polished shoes clicking against the pavement. The girl's eyes lifted to his, wide and impossibly blue. "Hello, mister," she said brightly, though her voice trembled. "Would you like some lemonade? It's really good. I made it myself this morning," he swallowed. "How much?" 50 cents, she said, then hesitated. "But if you can give more, Mommy would be very happy. She's sick and I'm helping her feel better." Something inside him cracked. He pulled out his wallet, fingers brushing past credit cards and crisp bills he rarely touched. He took out a $100 bill and handed it to her. "Keep the change." Her mouth fell open. $100? Oh my gosh. "Thank you, mister. What's your name?" he asked quietly. "Ruth. Ruth Turner." Turner. The name hit like a slap. His heart stuttered. "Your mom's name, what's her name?" "Carolyn Turner," Ruth said proudly. "She used to work for a big company, but they fired her. She said her boss had a heart made of ice." The cup in Roger's hand shook. Lemonade sloshed onto the pavement, a small yellow splash under the white sun. He didn't need to ask. He already knew. Carolyn Turner. Senior accountant. Laid off 3 months ago during the last round of cost optimization. Just a name on a spreadsheet. Just a number. But standing before him was that number's daughter, sweating, smiling, fighting for her mother with lemonade and courage. Roger looked down at her small, trembling hands clutching the bill like it was the world's last lifeline. Something unfamiliar pressed against his ribs, painful and sharp. Guilt, or maybe the first stirrings of something worse. Regret. "Your mommy must be very proud of you," he managed. Ruth smiled, a gap between her front teeth, sunlight catching in her hair. "I hope so. I just want her to stop crying at night." Roger turned away, his chest tight, the heat suddenly unbearable. For the first time in years, his perfect world didn't feel perfect at all. Night crept over Dallas like a tide of black glass, swallowing the last streaks of orange heat that had blistered the city all day. From the 43rd floor of his penthouse, Roger Brandner stood before the massive windows and watched his reflection shimmer against the skyline. The city below pulsed with light, endless arteries of motion and money, but all he could see was a faded piece of cardboard, trembling in the small hands of a girl who shouldn't have known what desperation was. "Buy my lemonade. It's to help my sick mommy." The words looped in his mind, haunting him with the rhythm of a prayer. He poured himself a drink from the crystal decanter on the counter, the amber liquid catching the city's glow, and stared at it like he could drown his guilt inside the glass. He'd spent years perfecting the art of not feeling. But now even the bourbon burned differently. Less comfort, more confession. His penthouse was a study in silence. Marble floors, a wall of awards, everything expensive, everything precise, and yet everything utterly dead. No sound but the hum of the refrigerator and the distant thrum of the city that never truly slept. He sank into the leather armchair facing the window, staring out as if expecting Amanda to step out of the reflection and forgive him, but she wouldn't. She couldn't. The clock ticked past midnight when Roger finally moved. He set the empty glass down, opened his laptop, and pulled up the Brander Industries employee archives. His fingers hovered above the keys longer than they ever had in a boardroom. Turner Carolyn. The name appeared in sterile black text, one of hundreds of terminated employees. Her digital file opened with a polite little sound, as if the machine didn't understand it was cutting him open. Position: Senior Accountant, years of service. 10. Termination date: 3 months ago. Reason: workforce optimization. Roger stared at the line until it blurred. Workforce optimization. His idea, his language. He'd crafted it himself to sound efficient, almost humane, a clean term for something dirty. He scrolled through the comments. Excellent employee. Consistently exceeds expectations. Team-oriented. Sole provider for dependent child. The last phrase made his throat tighten. Sole provider. Ruth's face rose unbidden in his mind. The pale blue eyes, the too sweet lemonade, the pride that barely hid her fear. Roger closed the laptop with a sharp click. The sound echoed through the empty apartment. He ran a hand down his face, feeling the weight of the day and the years before it pressing in. He hadn't planned on being this man. The young version of him, the one who'd built Brander from nothing, used to talk about innovation and people, about changing lives. But then Amanda died, and the world had turned into an equation. If it couldn't be measured, it didn't matter. He rose abruptly and walked to the window again, the city now a constellation of promises he no longer believed in. Somewhere below, in the shadows of those glowing towers, a little girl was probably asleep in a small apartment, dreaming of saving her mother with lemonade and sunlight, and he was the reason she needed saving at all. Roger pressed his forehead against the cool glass. The city light shimmered, bending and warping through the film of moisture forming in his eyes. "What have I done?" he whispered. His phone buzzed on the table, the name of his assistant, Hannah Lee, glowing across the screen. He hesitated, then answered. "Sir, just reminding you about tomorrow's investor briefing," Hannah said briskly. "And the finance department still needs your signature for the next round of cost cuts. HR said it'll impact about—" "Stop!" The word came out sharper than he intended. He inhaled, forcing calm into his voice. "Send me the list of names." A pause. "Sir," I said, "send me the names. Every single person on that list. Of course, Mr. Brandner." He hung up before she could ask more. A low, angry sound rumbled from somewhere inside him, startling in its rawness. He'd spent 3 years mastering indifference, but tonight the armor cracked. The image of Ruth under that brutal sun wouldn't leave him alone. He could almost smell the lemons, feel the stickiness of sugar on his fingers, hear the trembling sincerity in her voice. He walked into his study, past rows of sleek furniture and framed accolades, until he reached a small photo on the bookshelf, the last one taken of Amanda. She stood beside a little neighborhood lemonade stand, laughing as she handed a crumpled $10 bill to 2 beaming children. "These are the moments that matter, Roger." He picked up the photo. His hand shook. Lightning flared over the city, a brief white flash that threw his reflection against the glass again. The man staring back at him looked older than 34. sharper around the edges, hollow where it mattered most. Something inside him whispered that he couldn't go back to sleep pretending none of it existed. And that was when he decided to find her, Carolyn Turner. He didn't know what he would say or if she'd even let him through the door. But he knew one thing for certain. Somewhere out there was a woman he'd reduced to a statistic, and a child who believed the world could be saved one paper cup at a time. For the first time in years, Roger Brandner didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But for once, that uncertainty felt less like chaos and more like consequence. Rain came to Dallas the next evening as if the sky itself had reached its breaking point. Thick drops hammered against the Porsche's windshield, smearing the neon reflections of streetlights into ribbons of color. Roger Brandner hadn't planned to drive anywhere. He'd planned to forget, but forgetting had become impossible. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw a small girl in a faded blue dress, holding a cardboard sign against a wall of heat and indifference. Now, as thunder grumbled across the city, he navigated through narrow streets far from the sleek corridors of downtown. The navigation screen glowed faintly in the dark, displaying an address pulled from the company archives, 1127 East Moreland Avenue. He'd told himself this was just curiosity, a gesture of conscience, nothing more. But that was a lie. He needed to see what his decisions had done. The buildings around him grew older, rougher. The high-rises gave way to small houses with sagging roofs and flickering porch lights. Puddles pooled in potholes and stray dogs prowled the gutters. It wasn't the kind of neighborhood that made the news unless something terrible happened there. He slowed as he spotted the number on a cracked mailbox. The house was 2 stories, its paint peeling in uneven strips. One window was boarded up. The other glowed faintly behind thin curtains. A single porch light flickered, fighting to stay alive against the storm. Roger parked at the curb, his heart thudding with an unfamiliar heaviness. He didn't get out at first. He just sat there watching. Through the rain-streaked glass, he saw movement, a shadow crossing the small living room. Then a girl's voice muffled by distance and thunder. "Mommy, I'm home, Ruth." She appeared in the window a moment later, shaking rain from her hair, still wearing that same blue dress. She pulled something from her backpack, a few dollar bills and coins, and placed them carefully on the kitchen table. Then, another figure entered the frame. Carolyn Turner. Roger had expected someone broken, a ghost of a woman. Instead, he saw someone still holding on, barely but fiercely. Her hair, once blonde, was streaked with gray and pulled back in a messy bun. She wore an oversized sweater and looked thin, too thin, but her movements carried a tired grace. She smiled faintly at Ruth, said something Roger couldn't hear, then gathered the money with trembling hands. The little girl hugged her mother tightly, pressing her face against her shoulder. Carolyn held her close, one hand running gently through her daughter's damp hair. Then suddenly she broke. Roger could see it in the way her shoulders shook, the silent sobs she tried to hide. He looked away. He shouldn't be here. Watching them like this felt invasive, almost cruel, but his feet refused to move. He saw Ruth whisper something, her lips forming the words, "It's okay. Mommy, we'll be okay." The innocence of it hit harder than any boardroom defeat ever could. Roger leaned back in his seat, shutting his eyes as rain hammered the roof. The storm outside was nothing compared to the one inside his chest. After a long moment, he opened the car door and stepped out. The rain was cold and immediate, soaking through his suit as he walked up the cracked path to the porch. The closer he got, the heavier his breath became. He could see their shadows moving behind the curtain, 2 shapes clinging to each other, unaware of the man who had brought their suffering to their doorstep. His hand rose to knock, then froze. What could he possibly say? "I'm the reason you can't afford your medicine. I'm the man your daughter begged strangers to help." His fingers trembled inches from the door. A gust of wind ripped through the street, shaking the porch. He let his hand fall. Not yet. He turned to leave, but something on the porch caught his eye. A small potted plant, wilted but alive, sitting beside the door. Stuck in the soil was a toothpick sign written in purple crayon. "For Mommy to get better." The handwriting was unmistakable. Roger felt something burn behind his eyes. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his pen, and scribbled a note on the back of a business card. "Keep fighting. You're not forgotten." He slipped it under the pot, unseen, and walked back toward the car. He sat behind the wheel, soaked and shaking, and watched as the porch light flickered one last time before steadying. Inside, Carolyn and Ruth sat together on the couch, a blanket around them, the faint glow of the television painting their faces in pale blue. He didn't know how long he stayed there. Minutes, maybe hours, but when he finally drove away, something inside him had changed. For the first time in his adult life, Roger Brandner realized that money could not insulate him from consequence, that every decision he made had a face, a name, a heartbeat, and somewhere between the lightning and the rain, between the mother he destroyed and the child who still believed in kindness, the man who ruled over glass towers began to crumble from within. He didn't yet know what he would do, but he knew this. He couldn't stay a ghost in his own empire any longer. The following morning came gray and airless, the kind of dawn that carried the taste of metal in the sky. Roger Brandner hadn't slept. His penthouse, once his fortress of control, felt like a mausoleum now, too neat, too sterile, every shadow whispering his failures back at him. He sat at his dining table with a cup of untouched coffee cooling beside him, staring at his laptop. The Brandner Industries logo glowed faintly on the screen, blue and indifferent. Behind it was a spreadsheet, rows and columns of numbers, profits, percentages. He'd once looked at those numbers and felt power. Now he saw ghosts. One row caught his eye. Projected layoffs, Q4, 987 employees. Projected savings, $22.6 million. His hand hovered over the keyboard, the cursor blinking like a pulse. He imagined Ruth again, standing under the merciless sun, her small hands clutching the sign that had shattered his sleep. Then Carolyn, her frail arms wrapped around her daughter, crying where she thought no one could see. He shut the laptop hard enough to rattle the cup beside it. Coffee sloshed over the rim. When had it happened? When had he stopped seeing people and started seeing data? Roger rose abruptly, pushing back the chair. He walked to the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking downtown Dallas. The skyline stretched before him, cold, glittering, perfect. His empire, and beneath it the ruins of everyone who had built it for him. His phone buzzed. Hannah's voice crackled through, bright and brisk as always. "Morning, sir. The investors' briefing starts at 10. I've sent you the updated projections. Oh, and the PR team wants your approval on the layoffs announcement." Layoffs. That word again. "Cancel it," Roger said. "Cancel what, sir?" "The layoffs. All of them." A pause. "Mr. Brandner, that's not advisable. The board will—" "I said cancel them." His voice had an edge that made Hannah fall silent. He ended the call before she could protest. For a long moment he just stood there, breathing hard as though he'd stepped off a ledge. But it wasn't enough. Guilt demanded more than corporate gestures. It demanded atonement. He grabbed his keys. The drive-through downtown was a blur of lights and horns. He wasn't sure where he was going until he was already there. Clyde Warren Park, the same stretch of sidewalk where Ruth had been selling lemonade just 2 days before. The spot was empty now. The cardboard box was gone, the sign missing, the only trace a faint ring of dried lemonade on the pavement. He crouched down, brushing his fingers over the spot as if it might tell him where she'd gone. Around him, the city moved like a living machine. People passing, cars honking, life resuming as though no one had ever stood there trying to save a mother's life for 50 cents a cup. A voice startled him. "You looking for someone?" He turned. A food truck vendor nearby was setting up for the lunch rush. Roger hesitated, then nodded. "A little girl. She was selling lemonade here a few days ago." The man wiped his hands on a towel. "Blonde kid? Blue dress?" Roger's heart jumped. "Yes," the man sighed. "Yeah, I saw her. Sweet kid. She hasn't been back since yesterday morning. Poor thing looked exhausted. Her mom's real sick, you know. I think she lives a few blocks east near the hospital." The hospital. Roger thanked the man and hurried back to his car. The traffic blurred around him, the city suddenly too loud, too fast. He pressed harder on the accelerator. When he reached the hospital, St. Mark's Community Medical Center, it was already mid-afternoon. The building was old, its paint peeling, the sign missing a few letters. Inside, the air smelled faintly of disinfectant and anxiety. At the front desk, a nurse looked up. "Can I help you, sir?" "I'm looking for a patient." "Carolyn Turner," the nurse typed quickly, then frowned. "Room 312, but she's not in good shape." "Are you family?" Roger hesitated. "No," he said softly. I'm the reason she's here. The nurse blinked, uncertain, but he was already walking away. The corridor was dim, lined with old linoleum that squeaked under his shoes. He passed rooms filled with people attached to machines, families whispering, the low hum of fragile lives hanging on. When he reached room 312, the door was half open. He stopped. Inside, Ruth sat in a chair beside the bed, coloring quietly with broken crayons on a hospital tray. Carolyn lay asleep, pale and motionless, a tangle of IV lines snaking from her arm. Her face, peaceful but thin, was unmistakable. Ruth looked up at him then, startled, her big blue eyes widening. "You're the lemonade man," she said softly. Roger froze. "Yes," he whispered. Ruth smiled faintly, then turned back to her drawing. "Mommy's getting better. The doctor said so." He stepped inside, every movement cautious, reverent. Carolyn stirred slightly, her eyelids fluttering. When they opened, recognition flickered there, and then something sharper. "You," she rasped. Roger's throat tightened. He nodded once, helplessly. "I didn't mean for any of this." Her voice cracked like dry paper. "You meant to make money. You did that." Ruth looked between them, confused. "Mommy?" Carolyn closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. Roger wanted to speak, to explain, but no words felt worthy. He simply stood there, the silence thick as confession. And then softly, Carolyn said something he never forgot. "You can't rebuild people like you rebuild companies." He left the room trembling. The weight of her words followed him down the hall like footsteps. By the time he reached the parking lot, the world looked different, emptier, but sharper. He leaned against the car, drenched in the heavy air, and knew one truth for certain. He couldn't undo what he'd done, but he could change who he was next. Rain had returned by morning, thin and relentless, a gray veil draped over Dallas. The city looked different in the drizzle, muted, almost remorseful, as if it too sensed the weight of what was coming. Roger Brandner's Porsche sat in the hospital parking lot for hours before he could bring himself to go inside. The engine ticked softly, the dashboard clock marking each passing second like a countdown he couldn't stop. He had spent the night making phone calls. To the board, to doctors, to anyone who might help. No one had answers, only numbers. Hospital bills, policy terms, profit forecasts. The world, it seemed, only spoke the language he had taught it. Inside St. Mark's, fluorescent lights hummed against the ceiling. The smell of antiseptic clung to his clothes as he walked the hallways. Nurses moved with practiced urgency, their faces carved from fatigue. When he reached room 312, Ruth was there again, sitting cross-legged in the chair beside her mother's bed. Her crayons were gone this time. Her hands were folded in her lap, clutching that same wrinkled $100 bill he'd given her days ago. She looked up when he entered, her voice a fragile whisper. "Mommy won't wake up." The words hit harder than any boardroom blow, harder than any loss he'd ever faced. Carolyn lay motionless, her breathing shallow, the soft hiss of the oxygen machine the only sign that she was still fighting. Her skin had turned almost translucent, her lips pale. Roger moved closer, unsure if he even had the right to stand there. "Has the doctor been by?" Ruth nodded. "He said they need to do more tests, but we don't have money. Mommy doesn't have her job, and the insurance people said no." Her lower lip trembled, but she bit it hard, refusing to cry. Roger's throat felt raw. "You shouldn't worry about money." You'll what?" The voice came from behind him. Dr. Ramirez, a lean man in his 40s with weary eyes, stepped into the room, chart in hand. "Are you family?" Roger hesitated. "A friend," he said finally. The doctor's expression didn't soften. "Then you know she's critical. Severe pneumonia complicated by malnutrition and stress. We've done what we can, but she needs intensive treatment. Without insurance." He trailed off, the rest implied. "How much?" Roger's voice was hoarse, the doctor sighed. "Tens of thousands. Maybe more." Roger pulled out his phone. "Do it, whatever she needs. Bill me directly." Dr. Ramirez blinked. "Sir, that's—" "Do it." His tone left no room for argument. The doctor studied him a moment longer, then nodded slowly and left the room. When the door clicked shut, Ruth's small voice broke the silence again. "Are you rich?" Roger managed a humorless smile. "Yes," she tilted her head, confused. "Then why do you look so sad?" He didn't answer. How could he explain that he was looking at the debt of a lifetime, one no amount of money could repay? Hours passed. Machines beeped softly, rain drummed against the window, and Ruth eventually fell asleep in the chair, her head resting against the bed's edge. Roger sat nearby, his tie loosened, his eyes fixed on Carolyn's still form. He thought of Amanda again, of the night she died, the sound of screeching tires, the sterile glow of the hospital corridor, and the feeling that everything human inside him had gone dark. He'd promised himself he'd never feel that powerless again. Yet here he was, powerless once more. A nurse entered quietly. "Sir, visiting hours are over." Roger looked up. "I'm not leaving." She hesitated, saw something in his face, and nodded before leaving him in the dim light. When the room finally fell silent again, Roger reached out and took Carolyn's hand. It was cold, fragile, like something that could vanish if he gripped too tightly. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "You don't know how sorry I am." Her fingers twitched. Just slightly, but enough. Her eyelids fluttered open. For a moment her gaze was unfocused, drifting. Then it found him. The faintest shadow of a smile touched her lips. "You again." "Rest," he said softly. "You're safe. The doctors are taking care of everything." Her voice was barely audible. "You shouldn't be here." "I have to be." A tear slipped down the corner of her eye. "Why?" Roger hesitated. "Because I broke something I didn't understand. And I don't want to keep living like that." Her breathing hitched, a weak laugh escaping her throat. "You can't fix everyone you hurt." "I can try." The monitor beside her flickered, the beeps slowing. Panic shot through him. "Doctor!" he shouted, bolting toward the door. Nurses rushed in, voices overlapping, machines whirring to life. They pulled him back, told him to wait outside, but he couldn't move. He watched through the window as they worked. Compressions, injections, the flurry of hands and wires. Ruth woke with a start, eyes wide. "What's happening? What's wrong with Mommy?" Roger knelt in front of her, trying to steady his voice. "They're helping her. She's very strong, remember?" But his own hands were shaking. After what felt like forever, the doctor stepped out, his face drawn. "She's stable, for now. But she needs constant care. You said you'd cover her treatment?" "Yes," Roger said immediately. "Then sign this." The doctor handed him a clipboard. Roger signed without reading, his pen cutting sharp lines across the paper. His signature, the same one that had fired her months ago, now became the thing keeping her alive. The irony wasn't lost on him. When the hallway emptied and the storm outside grew louder, Roger leaned against the cold wall and looked at the hospital floor. He felt the strange sensation of something shifting inside him, not guilt this time, but purpose. He wasn't going back to Brander Industries. Not yet, not like this. He took out his phone and began typing a message to Hannah. "Prepare a statement. Effective immediately, Brander Industries will establish a relief fund for laid-off employees and their families. Call it whatever you want. Make it real." He hit send, then looked through the glass at Ruth, still clutching her mother's hand, her small shoulders trembling under the hospital light. For the first time in years, Roger wasn't thinking about stockholders or percentages. He was thinking about breath, heartbeat, and the fragile threads that connect one human to another. Outside, thunder rolled again, but this time, it didn't sound like punishment. It sounded like change. Morning broke like a confession, gray light cutting through the storm clouds, tracing cold streaks across the glass towers of downtown Dallas. Roger Brandner stood at the window of his penthouse, watching the city breathe beneath him. He hadn't slept. His reflection in the glass looked like a stranger. Shirt wrinkled, tie gone, eyes hollow but awake for the first time in years. He was supposed to be on a flight to New York for a shareholder summit. Instead, he was thinking about a hospital room, about a small girl's faith, and about a woman who might still hate him enough to die without letting him help. His phone vibrated on the counter. Hannah's voice filled the room, clipped and professional. "The board's furious, Roger. You froze expansion capital to fund your new relief initiative. The press is calling it damage control. Investors want a statement by noon." "Then give them one," he said quietly. "Tell them it's not about optics. It's about responsibility." There was silence on the other end. Then, they won't buy that. Then maybe it's time they stopped buying everything. He ended the call before she could respond. He turned back to the window, jaw tightening. Somewhere beyond those skyscrapers, Carolyn Turner was fighting for her life. and he was fighting for something he didn't yet understand. By noon, Brander Industries headquarters was a hornet's nest. Cameras swarmed the marble entrance. Security guards pressed back journalists shouting questions about layoffs, corruption, redemption. Inside the top-floor boardroom, 12 men and women waited like judges. Roger entered without a word. He didn't wear his usual armor of arrogance, no tailored tie, no designer smirk. "Just a man stripped to his truth, Roger," barked Alan Pierce, the CFO, his gold watch flashing. "Do you realize what you've done? You've diverted operating capital for a charity stunt. You've endangered this company's entire Q4 trajectory." Roger took his seat. "You call it a stunt. I call it correction." "Correction?" Another director scoffed. "We don't correct compassion. We calculate it. You've turned us into a bleeding heart headline." Roger's eyes narrowed. "You ever met the people behind those numbers you keep trimming? Have you looked them in the eye when you fire them?" Alan slammed his folder shut. "We're not a church. We're a corporation." "No," Roger said softly. "We're a mirror, and I don't like what I see in it." The room went still. He stood pacing slowly. 3 months ago, I signed a layoff sheet that included a woman named Carolyn Turner. She had a daughter, 7 years old, the kind of kid who still believes lemonade can save her mother's life. A ripple of discomfort spread across the table. "I saw her on a street corner last week," he continued, voice tightening. "In the heat. Begging for hope I took away. That's what we did. That's who we are, and it ends now." "You're emotional," Alan sneered. "This is about some sob story." Roger's gaze was lethal calm. "Maybe it is, but that sob story just changed how I see everything. I'd rather go bankrupt doing right than rich doing nothing." A beat of silence. Then chaos erupted. Voices overlapping, threats of removal, warnings of lawsuits. Roger waited, letting the noise burn itself out. Then he dropped a file on the table. "You can vote me out if you want, but this fund stays. The board already authorized it under my signature, and I'll take every cent of my personal equity to keep it running." The threat hit like thunder. No one moved. Finally, Alan leaned back face hard. "You'll destroy yourself for one woman?" Roger looked out the window. "No, I'll save myself because of her." Hours later, he was back at the hospital. The scent of antiseptic, the beeping machines, the same gray light slanting through blinds. But something had changed. Carolyn was awake. Pale, thin, but conscious. Her eyes followed him as he entered, suspicion sharpening her tired voice. "You shouldn't be here." "I know." She turned away, coughing lightly. "I don't need your pity, Mr. Brandner." He sat down beside her. "It's not pity." "Then what is it? Guilt, conscience? You think buying me a hospital bed makes up for taking away my life?" Roger flinched. "I can't undo what I did, but I can try to make it right." Her laugh was brittle. "Right? You think right exists in your world?" She gestured weakly toward the door. "I lost my home, my job, my health, my dignity. My daughter saw me cry for the first time because of you." Roger's throat tightened. "And I saw a child who made me remember what humanity looks like." Carolyn's eyes filled with tears, but her voice stayed sharp. "Don't turn my pain into your salvation," he couldn't argue. He just sat there, head bowed, as the machines kept time between them. Minutes passed before she spoke again, softer this time. "Why did you come back?" "Because I had to see that you were still here," he said. "And because I need to tell you that Brander Industries belongs to you now. At least the part that should have cared. The fund's real. The layoffs will be reversed. I'll fight the board if I have to." Her lips trembled. "You'd give up your empire for this?" He nodded. "It was never an empire. It was a shield, and I don't need it anymore." She stared at him for a long moment, searching his face for the lie. But there was none. Only exhaustion and something dangerously close to sincerity. "You can't fix everything," she murmured. "I can start somewhere." From the corner, Ruth's small voice broke in, sleepy but firm. "Mommy, he helped. The doctor said you're getting better because he paid for the medicine." Carolyn looked at her daughter, then back at Roger. For the first time, her gaze softened. "Then maybe you start by helping her keep believing the world isn't cruel." Roger exhaled, the weight in his chest finally cracking open. "I will." Outside, the clouds began to thin, and the first streaks of sunlight spilled through the blinds, tracing gold across the hospital sheets. But neither of them noticed the shadow standing at the doorway. Alan Pierce, silent, watching, phone in hand, camera recording. A slow, deliberate smile crept across his face. Redemption had a price, and Roger Brandner was about to learn just how steep it could be. The reckoning a week later, Dallas pulsed with headlines. Every newsfeed screamed the same words. Brandner Industries CEO goes rogue. Board members leaked documents. Investors panicked and social media divided overnight. Roger stood before the glass wall of his office, the city sprawling below like a battlefield. What had begun as an act of conscience had become a storm, and Alan Pierce was at the eye of it. Alan's video had gone viral, a shaky recording of Roger in Carolyn's hospital room. His confession clipped and twisted out of context. The world didn't see guilt or compassion. It saw weakness. CEO admits liability and worker collapse. Brandner's empire crumbles. Every phone in the building buzzed. Stock tickers bled red. Hannah burst in. Roger, the board's called an emergency session. They want your resignation before market close. If you don't step down, they'll bury you. Roger turned. His eyes were calm, eerily so. Let them try. At the hospital, Carolyn was sitting up for the first time, sunlight brushing her pale face. Ruth was drawing again, a crayon sun smiling across the page. A nurse slipped in with an envelope. A courier left this for you. Carolyn frowned, opening it. Inside was a single page, a statement draft bearing Roger's signature. Effective immediately, I resign as CEO of Brandner Industries. The Employee Recovery Fund will remain independently governed by its beneficiaries. Tears blurred her vision. For all his mistakes, Roger Brandner was choosing ruin to make something right. Back downtown, the boardroom felt colder than usual. Cameras had been barred, but everyone knew leaks would come within hours. Roger entered, flanked by lawyers. Alan was already there, smug and waiting. You forced my hand, Alan said. The shareholders needed to know what kind of liability you'd become. Roger dropped a folder on the table. You mean the liability that saved your sister's job? Alan stiffened. What are you talking about? Roger's voice sharpened. You didn't think I'd dig? Every name on the layoff list had a story, Alan, including Angela Pierce, removed from the termination roster the day before I signed it. Who made that call? Alan's composure cracked. That's irrelevant. It's corruption, Roger interrupted, voice rising. You filmed me to save your own neck. Gasps rippled around the room. He opened the folder. Copies of internal emails, timestamps, and Alan's forged approvals. You wanted me gone so you could take over the company and bury your fraud under a PR scandal. Alan lunged for the papers, but Roger slid them across the table to the legal counsel. This company isn't dying for your greed, Roger said quietly. It's transforming. The room fell silent. That night, the news changed tone. Brandner exposes corporate fraud before stepping down. Employee Relief Fund gains historic support. For the first time in months, the story wasn't about profit, it was about people. Roger drove through the sleeping city until he found himself back at St. Mark's. Ruth's lemonade sign still leaned against the wall near the entrance, faded, rain-stained, but intact. He carried a small glass jar this time, filled not with coins, but with something heavier. His old gold cufflinks, a symbol of the man he'd been. He placed them beside her sign and whispered, "Payment in full." Inside, Carolyn was waiting. Her color had returned. Her voice was steadier. You really resigned, she said. I had to. She studied him for a long moment. You could have fought harder. He shook his head. Sometimes fighting means letting go. Ruth slipped between them, grinning. Mommy, can we go home soon? Carolyn smiled faintly. Yes, baby. Thanks to your lemonade. Ruth turned to Roger. Will you still visit us? Roger knelt eye level with her. If you'll sell me another cup. She giggled and nodded. As he rose to leave, Carolyn stopped him. Roger, I don't forgive you. Not yet, but I don't hate you anymore. He nodded, accepting it like a verdict. That's enough. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. The city lights flickered on the wet asphalt like stars scattered across the ground. For the first time in years, Roger didn't feel hollow. He didn't feel rich or ruined. He just felt alive. And somewhere behind him, a little girl's voice carried into the cooling night. Buy my lemonade. It's to help my mommy. Only this time it sounded like hope. Pure, unbroken hope.